Ready to get started again then? That's the post-lunch session. That's, okay, a few top tips then to do with copyright in general then. First of all, let's point out that there's a way of looking at copyright that helps, and it's about facilitation, not compliance. Going back a couple of hundred years, almost 300 in fact, over 300, Statute of Anne, the idea of copyright was this, that once upon a time it was easy to stop people copying your stuff, you just kept it locked in a cupboard. That's what happened. If you wanted your illuminated manuscript kept from copying, then you could control the copying by keeping it locked away. Not particularly good for the development of mankind's intellect, however, humankind's intellect. So copyright was introduced so that you could actually take your manuscript out the cupboard, you could let people see it and use it, knowing you had control over who could copy it and distribute it further. So it was a way of making sure that the stuff wasn't actually locked away. It is a control, and if a person chooses to exercise that control such that others can't use, well, then it does become restrictive. But copyright is a way in which we can use other people's stuff, and that's its base. So it's all about how to use other people's stuff online. As I say, the number of times whereby there's misplaced the misplaced idea that copyright is restrictive is something else. There is quite a spectrum. A lecturer at a college in Scotland asked United, I can't remember if it's United Features or United Syndication, about use of the Peanuts cartoons within teaching, and to include the cartoons up on the website. And I thought, I doubt it, because they actually license for large amounts of money, the Peanuts cartoons. But in fact, he got a reply very quickly saying you can use the cartoons as you like, as long as it's password protected on internal VLE, as you like in perpetuity for teaching purposes. Brilliant. The advantage was, of course, that they knew about copyright and licensing, so they could make a quick decision. And secondly, they were willing to put a reasonable block on it, knowing it wasn't going to affect their overall business case. My personal experience is the worst is asking those who don't know about copyright for permission, because they don't know what to say and they don't want to take a risk. So, funnily enough, I found the police to be one of the worst for that. Trying to get permission to use their materials was, I'm talking about the police force rather than the band. But the police were not terribly keen. Oh, they just didn't know, actually, to say yes or no. So, actually, if you have the right to use a work, if you have permission, then you can be confident in your compliance. You know what to do with it. This is why licenses, I find, are pretty good. Licenses can be agreed between people and organisations, and they set down exactly what you can do. Interestingly enough, this morning at about 10 o'clock, Just Legal received an inquiry which is asking about the TSL Education website. So that's the publisher of Times Higher Education, TES, and stuff like this. And interestingly, their terms and conditions actually say that you're not allowed to link to their site, which I find quite incredible. But I think you can link to their homepage, but not to content within that. So admittedly, you know where you stand. I don't think their approach is one that's particularly conducive to good relations with its clientele, but it's there in black and white. You know what you can and can't do. So, talk about facilitation, though. That's this is the way where you can be confident in using someone else's stuff online and not having to worry about it coming back to bite. Look in the pantry, actually, one of the things that we're going to have to change about open educational resources is this idea that, first of all, think of everything you would like to use and then try and sort out using it. As I say, that's a bit like the art tutor deciding that they want to make an art installation that's a pile-up of 35 Ferraris. That's not going to happen. What we need to do instead is work with what we've got available to us and what we can create materials from. And the good news is we've got an ever-growing range of materials we can use more straightforwardly. So find out what ingredients you've already got. Some of those in general use will be from blanket licenses the CLA material. So for instance, this may seem weird, but if I have a bit of artwork that I want to show on as part of teaching materials on the VLE, I'm not talking about OER here, then actually for me to get the right to use that bit of artwork, scan it, digitize it, have a photograph of it, if it's in copyright, and there's not a license otherwise, is actually pretty difficult to do. So I'll have to find out, someone ask permissions, maybe get an answer, maybe not. But what I can do instead is actually, if I find that publication, a UK publication, or one from actually in most countries of the world, a book that's been published including a photograph of that artwork, I can scan that page from the publication under the CLA license and put it up online. And voila, we have the artwork on the VLE legally, using a license that we already have. So sometimes there's a workaround. The BBC is an interesting one with this. And again, it's the licenses sometimes don't appear to make sense because they've been created in a particular context. So if I'm listening to BBC Radio 4 and it's a programme that's good and I'm recording it, then the Educational Recording Agency license, the ERA license, allows me to use that. And use that quite widely on the campus. Let's put it up onto a VLE and stuff like that. That's all okay. With ERA Plus, I can make it available throughout the UK as well, though I need to limit it to the UK. So that's all very well. If I missed the programme was on an hour ago, I can go to BBC iPlayer, but I'm not allowed to record off BBC iPlayer. That's the ERA is a recording license for broadcasts, and BBC iPlayer isn't a broadcast. So now it seems like, from the point of view of a tutor, like if it's on now and I record, it's fine. If an hour later I got availability of on BBC iPlayer, then it's not okay. How does that work? Well, as I say, the licenses don't need to make sense for a start. So I can introduce forward roles into them and all the rest of it. There's a lag in things changing. Admittedly, the BBC at some point will change, hopefully, their terms and conditions of iPlayer to allow the recording of the iPlayer programs. Admittedly, they'll have to renegotiate rights in order to do that in some cases, so that's why they can't just go ahead and do it at the moment. And that's why, for example, some programs are only available for 7 days, because that was the agreed rights that they've negotiated for that, why you can only get them for 7 days on iPlayer. In future, there may be a renegotiation of the rights, in which case we'll be able to use the license directly from the BBC. The ERA license won't apply to that. But for the moment, we have the two separate things, and that's the way it is. You have to live with that. I can't change that. We've also got open license material. As I say, one thing in open educational resources is the exponential growth by using open license material to create new open license material. There are some questions as to interoperability of Creative Commons licenses, for example, and other open licenses, and I'll come on to that later. I will come on to that later, I promise you. Let users deal fairly. Where circumstances and purposes allow, let users do it for themselves. There is a right to fair dealing for private study and research. And actually, sometimes these days, there's this situation, for example, whereby a tutor wants to copy a website and print it out and give it to students, or email it even to students. Both of those make multiple copies. You might have to look for permissions even for to copy the website. Why not just let the students go to the website? Okay, depends on the circumstances. Sometimes that may not be appropriate. If you want them to take materials on a field trip to the Western Isles of Scotland, don't rely on web access when you're there. But in most circumstances, let the student find out for themselves. And again, the fair dealing right allows a student to go and make a copy of something for their private study or for non-commercial research. Likewise, if your member of staff is reviewing or critiquing something, then they can bring in materials to support that. It's a fair dealing right. That means if I'm critiquing a particular aspect of a film, I'm not going to be able to recreate the whole film. You're going to have to ask what is fair. What is if you put yourself in the position of the rights owner, would they say, well, actually 15 seconds of showing an explosion like from the film isn't going to stop me selling DVDs on Amazon or whatever. That's so again, there's that way of approaching it. It's a fair dealing right. But it's there, and it's to be used. When you're talking about non-OER material, you have the wide-ranging examination creation. That isn't, as a lecturer, I don't think that was ever pointed out to me, but it's been around for an awful long time in the Copyright Acts. So I'm not entirely sure why. Nobody knows about that. By the way, I should have said before, these slides will be up in SlideShare once I get a connection enough to put them all up. So, and if you Google SlideShare JISC Legal, then you'll find them. That's there. Yeah, I don't give out long URLs. Googling, or you may use another browser. Yeah. License to inspire. Licenses are key, as we know that, because open educational resources is a movement inspired by licenses. It's all about giving permissions, and particularly liberal ones. The licenses are key, and the licenses set bounds. You can do anything with a license. If you want to give someone permission, then you can do so by way of a license, and you can set whatever conditions you like on that. So very powerful way of sorting out relations between people. Again, we haven't really taken that far enough. With academic staff, institutions rarely have sorted out and worked out the negotiations which will lead to a proper ownership and license agreement. Blanket licenses, very useful in ways. The blanket licenses are ones that are general licenses. We generally have known and loved the CLA license when we've got to the photocopier and can just make copies for the class. That's been great over the years. Admittedly, I have to say that one day I was photocopying the Encyclopedia Britannica's entry on Finland, I think it was, and I happened to be looking at the excluded works list, and there's the Encyclopedia Britannica. Oops. So yes, I stopped copying the Encyclopedia Britannica. So yeah, still limits there. Interestingly, how the world's going to go, Canada have a few institutions there have just pulled out of their blanket licensing scheme equivalent to the CLA and to some of the journal licenses as well, because the blanket license with regards to access to journals, because they say they can do better actually negotiating individual agreements. And it's the case sometimes if you're talking about journals, for example, if you've moved to e-resources, online resources and e-journals, then you may be able to make copies using the terms and conditions granted by that license. So why are we paying for a CLA license as well? And again, that's something that's going to get played out in the future. The CLA wants to put up the license fees to reflect the growing digital use of materials, at the same time as universities are saying that we shouldn't be paying so much to CLA, because actually an awful lot of copying happens under other licenses, or can be under other licenses. More specific licenses. Interestingly, the NHS in Scotland's one to watch out for. They have recently ended their CLA license. They have said they're going to do no photocopying other than photocopying of stuff that's licensed otherwise. So the big databases that they use, their academic research actually that they look into, they're going to use the terms and conditions of their subscription to these journals and that. So the CLA has actually offered a reward to whistleblowers for photocopying going on within the NHS Scotland. So it's an interesting one, and see how that plays out. Negotiating licenses. Again, we have got, you can blame lawyers for this one, that's somewhat into a cycle of over-complex licenses occasionally. Licenses shouldn't be complex. Even, I think the one that I can just about live with is the Creative Commons legal code. That we'll come to see that you've probably come across already, that there is what's called the license deed, which is the summary or human readable version of the license. That doesn't have legal effect. And then you have the legal code, which is the bit for lawyers that actually specifies this. I think the legal code's actually readable. Maybe that's just me. But worthwhile having a look. It takes a little while, but a cup of coffee, but you should be able to get through it. It's quite interesting to see how it's actually expressed and what they've dealt with there. Still a playoff. Now, actually, Just Legal, we started off with a non-CC license for our materials way back. And the reason for that is because we had a much shorter license than the Creative Commons one. It basically gave liberal rights for educational use in the UK, do what you like with it, more or less. And had then certain restrictions for commercial use, and also a restriction against adaptations, because there was a thought that we didn't want people doing a remix of legal advice, because that could get dangerous. This was about a paragraph long, which if you compare to the Creative Commons legal code, well, our one was a lot shorter. But for various reasons, we have moved on to Creative Commons. And we'll come to that as a scenario. So yeah, keeping it simple is part of it. Making sure you think about what is being granted, trying to future-proof in terms of rights and working it out. So if you're asking a tutor to undertake activity and you want them to license their stuff, if it's not in the course of employment or you want to get agreement, then try and make sure you're covering all the rights for the future. Spread the license word. Actually, institutions are pretty bad about knowing even what licenses they hold. Never mind anything else. I do know an example of one institution that had 4 of the same license. It was the Ordnance Survey one. They were paying 4 times for the same thing. It's a pity the Ordnance Survey hadn't got onto them, but the Ordnance Survey hadn't recognised it as being all one institution. But the Geology Department had taken out one, the Geography Department had taken out one, their central services had taken out one, and there was another department that had taken out one. They were all institution-wide licenses. And then they just didn't speak to each other to know. That's knowing the bounds of it as well. An interesting question is that I like to ask IT people is about Microsoft academic licenses, which are used pretty much across the board in academia, and to ask them if they actually offer any commercial training using Microsoft software or operating system indeed. And the answer is invariably yes. So have they got machines set aside with Microsoft commercial license, full license on it for doing that training? Because that's a commercial use beyond academic license. Yep, not many do, but and you can understand how that ends up in trouble, because if I'm a commercial provider of Microsoft accredited training down the road, and I'm paying full whack for my licenses, and I know that the University of Jason Miles Campbell here, that's down the road, is offering commercial training using cheap Microsoft licenses, I'm going to be fairly aggrieved, and that's as the training provider. So telling staffing about that is pretty good. There's a Just Legal resource, actually. If your institution is one way, if you can go around and ask staff about the licenses your institution holds and they can talk about the licenses, then great. If not, there's a Just Legal resource that produces a template, and you need to know which licenses you have. You score out the paragraphs relating to the ones you don't have, and you send round part of a newsletter a few paragraphs that explains what you've got. So staff often don't know about, for example, the right to use newspaper cuttings in certain circumstances. But you probably do have an NLA license, most institutions do. The right to use, Ordnance Survey is a good example as well. Traditionally, there have been certain departments that take out the Ordnance Survey license, and it could be that people in other departments might make good use of that. And actually, one of the interesting things is has been some institutions try to collect together the control of licensing in order that they know actually what licenses they hold. It could, again, another example might be up in Scotland. That tutor was telling you about they got permission for the Peanuts cartoons. He certainly could have thought, great, I can use Peanut cartoons in my teaching. It's another step to think, actually, I should tell everyone else about it because the permission has been given to the institution. That means everyone can use Peanuts cartoons in their teaching. Admittedly, students might get a bit sick of Peanuts cartoons when it starts appearing everywhere, but that's in terms of this. But yeah, I'm not very high in the world of artistic creativity, so Microsoft clip art suits me fine for cheesy illustration on my PowerPoint slides. But secondly, I'm not going to be breaching any copyright, I know that, because I would look pretty daft breaching copyright, wouldn't I, in my slides talking about copyright? Well, the risk management approach there. But yeah, my mobile phone, by the way, is full of copyright infringing stuff. I have CDs. And all my Precious Girls Aloud CDs have been bought. They are actually mine. But I have ripped them onto my mobile phone, and nothing in law gives me the right to do that. But I chose to do that. Oops. Right, okay, here's a question. How would you say about your institution if you know this? Well, there's a don't know option. As to the use of licenses you hold, do you reckon you're on the ball? You have a passing knowledge? You muddle on and keep your head down? We hope no one notices or don't know. Let's press your buttons now. 16 or 17 responses. 18. Ta-da! Here we go. All right, then we've got a mix there. That's not too many muddling on and keeping our head down, but well, I suppose between that and we hope no one notices, there's a few. There. And passing knowledge is there. Again, the CLA license, because it's been around for quite a long time, tends to be the one most known about. Though that said, I think I was probably in about the 6th or 7th year of lecturing before I knew much about the CLA license. I suppose before that I was just taking down things to the copy shop, handing it in, and they would tell me if there was a problem. But I do remember one of my colleagues now. One thing I did know is that it was good to be friends with the copy shop. That's Millie's Cookies now and again, things like that, so that when, with 10 minutes to go to my lecture and I needed 100 copies of something, and I smiled and apologetically and managed to get it done. But then I heard one of my colleagues going down and saying, and they refused to copy something because it was in breach of copyright, and that's to do so. And I heard her saying, "Do you know who I am?" Her photocopy is going to get lost every week, possibly deservedly. Yes.
The thing about your phone and
yep.
getting is the technology that allows you to do that.
Mm.
When people create that type of technology, maybe they should put some sort of, buttons that say, or some sort of flashing warning messages that say you're not supposed to be doing it.
Well, it's never going to know whether I have the right or not. So, for example, if I buy off Amazon.co.uk my favourite Girls Aloud tracks, and that allows me by the license to transfer them onto this device, then it's going to look exactly the same to this device as me ripping a CD and putting it on. There's no way of it knowing. Of course, there are DRM systems that do protect it and will provide that sort of, it'll either just stop you doing it or will warn you that you're in breach of copyright. And certainly that's there. I'm always split on DRM systems. Part of me says I like certainty. And if something tells me that you had a license to transfer your song onto 3 devices, you're now attempting to transfer it onto the 4th, that's in breach. Now you're not going to allow you to do it, then fine. And I don't need to count how many devices I've put it onto. It'll tell me. It's going to annoy me, but it gives me some certainty. Whereas DRM often stops you doing things which are well, either permissible or are something I'd like to take a risk decision on, like transferring to my mobile phone and ripping the CDs. And
nothing prevents you from taking a print screen of an image that you can't right-click and save.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, there's generally a way around it, but then again, there's very little to stop people stealing physical stuff as well, other than locking doors and all the rest of it. The same goes for everything. That's yeah, just because you can do it for a start doesn't mean it's right. That's yeah. Okay, that's I'm getting there. I'm hoping that one day, actually, with the importance of licenses, then that end will go up, the top end, number 1 and 2, but still 50% isn't bad. Use holdings into usings. Now, I've got another story about this one. A couple of years ago, I was invited over to a Terina meeting. That's the sort of network of networks. You might have heard of the Janet Network in the UK. Well, it's the sort of the get-together of all the academic networks round about Europe. These were a bunch of guys. There weren't many women there, I have to say, with the biggest laptops I've ever seen in my life, and a combined current drain of a small nuclear power station with all the gadgets attached to them. And they basically spent their time talking about how their terabytes were bigger than their petabytes and so on and so forth, and how big bandwidth they had. So all very interesting. But they invited me along to talk about copyright, and this was a special group involved with media and media servers. And the idea was that to cut down on bandwidth and traffic across these networks, to have media stores effectively throughout the network that would where if there was going to be content that was going to be delivered frequently, there was high bandwidth, sort of high quality video coming out of institutions, and then it would store it and serve it. And they wanted me to talk about copyright implications of this. And they had, first of all, it was a right setup because, fantastically, because they showed me to where I was going to present in this room full of people, and they had a camera set up at the front. And I had to point out that nobody had given me a form to sign to give permission to broadcast me across Europe to other members of this. So a great start from copyright terms, so they're all looking at their feet by this point. They had shown earlier in the meeting examples of the media search engines that were going to be used as part of these media servers. Not one of the examples had anything to do with copyright or licensing. So I was trying to point out to them that it's all very well searching for something, being told that it comes back with 10,000 hits. But actually what I want to know is what ones can I use? Knowing that they're there isn't enough. I want to know about use. Holdings is not actually very useful. It's usings that you want to know about. What can I use? And they hadn't thought of that. So it could be that they had 10,000 videos, high definition quality videos, but actually if none of them were actually usable for my purpose, then being able to find 10,000 of them was useless. So what we need to do actually is understand better about the rights that we have to use things. It's not like the library when we just assume that the book's in the library and therefore we can do what we like with it. That's okay. Of course, we do have different levels of usage of books in the library in terms of short loan, reference, and lending collections. So we have to understand how that applies to the digital world. Just because you can get something doesn't mean you can necessarily use it for what you want. And indeed, one of the things that takes a bit of getting used to. Common question we get is, downloaded something off iTunes. I paid £3.99, 99 pence, whatever for it. So therefore, can I use it and put it up on the university VLE for all my students? The answer is no, because what you bought was a license, and the license doesn't allow that. You bought a license for personal use. I dare say if you go to the record company, they will sort out a license for the use that you want. It might cost you a bit, but that's the world. I gave the peanuts example. Seeking permission isn't always tough. It tends to be easier with the sort of non-complex things and non-audiovisual things where you have fewer layers of copyright. When you find out that, even with a report, when I find out it's been a collaboration of 6 different institutions, then I begin to think, oh no. And also the number of times just legal get asked, the question that goes along these lines. We've come to the end of our project and we'd like to know what we do about copyright now. I say, well, ideally invent the TARDIS and go back to the start of your project and sort it out then, because it's not there. Because sometimes it gets a bit muddy. But as long as you can ask permission, then there. Unfortunately, the experience of those seeking permission is that sometimes you're going to get no answer, actually quite a lot, and sometimes you're going to get no. And sometimes you're going to have to negotiate. Interesting approaches. There was I know of a university that they knew that you cannot do this. You cannot send out a letter to someone or an email to someone saying, if you do not reply within 7 days, we'll take that to be permission. That isn't permission. What they did instead was they sent letters off with a check attached and saying, if you cash this check, that will be permission under the following terms. And actually, the response rate was much higher. Most of the people who responded say, look, we're not going to cash the check, but thank you very much for this. It got them to do something rather than just ignore the email that they would have got. So I suppose it's because they were showing that they attached a value to it, and the recipient felt obliged to do something, I suppose, as a result. They weren't offering much. They didn't have much budget, so They were offering things for like 4-page documents, they're offering £15. Like that sort of level of fun. That's all they had available, but they vastly improved their response rate. I think it's going to be interesting. Certainly my experience of universities is that they're poor in having a central function to carry out these sort of activities. It's good to have experience and expertise together in this. There's certainly one of the Australian universities that years back had a corridor, which I thought was great, and it was an actual corridor with doors round the sides, and the first one was, I think, was it pedagogy first, and then design, and then web design? Oh no, there was typing actually even beyond this, and then graphics, and there was copyright was in there somewhere. And actually, to create online learning resources, you went round the corridor. You knew you had to visit all the offices, and by the time you got to the last one, then you knew you had it in place. And so they had that central function to help deal with the production of online learning resources. We probably need more of that in the UK. Copyright on the agenda, that doesn't get talked about very much. And again, it's raising it up. Open Educational Resources is doing it a bit because it does ask questions of the whole business model. I wrote a paper as part of the OER IPR support project, the phase 2 project called Strategic, what's it called? It's the strategic management issues involved in copyright and OER. So available from the Just Legal website there. But the strategic management and OER, if you Google that with Just Legal, you'll certainly get the paper. What we need is support and assistance, certainly, and resources put into that. And again, I always say that if an institution, I think of the perfect institution, would have all the staff effectively using other people's stuff well as some element of creating their own stuff and contributing to the catalogue of materials available. If we got there, then think of all the money that would be saved in terms of staff time. So you can go to senior management teams and say, well, we could save millions, or at least we can free up millions to use for other better things. Come on, let's do it. So that's with proper copyright support, you don't need to be reinventing the wheel and paraphrasing and recreating other materials that have already been created elsewhere. Clear ownership is needed in order to deal with this. Again, we've spoken about that already. We need to know who owns the stuff. Part of that means that, and again, audiovisual departments have been getting better at this. For example, we've been dealing with recording lectures over the past year or two. It's become topical. Then there has been much more done on getting it sorted out beforehand, rather than the situation of, I recorded a lecture a year ago, what will happen with the copyright now? X is leaving the institution and doesn't want it used anymore. Those sort of questions. Want to make you happy, there's loads of information and guidance available. One interesting thing about, and again it could be you, is whether all staff know about who are the champions with regards to copyright and understanding that and helping out. It can be daunting, and some of the material sort of put you off to start with. On the whole, it's not too difficult. Show them my copyright in one slide. And there's lots of help available. Actually, the license providers, the CLA, ERA, NLA, all provide pretty good information and lots of JISC projects. Okay, any questions about general copyright and licensing and that background that you've thought of? One that comes up is who's liable. That's when it goes wrong, and that is the person who does the infringement, or those inciting the infringement, or those who provide the technical means for the infringement to occur. It's known as secondary infringement. Again, that's probably not the one to get hung up on. It is true that sometimes there are copyright cases, and that people do have to pay cash because of copyright infringement. But actually, the disruption is not really to that. One of the areas of disruption is that that we currently have quite a good relationship with publishers, believe it or not, in comparison to other countries. Some might think they're taking the mick with regards to price increases recently. I'm not going to comment on that, but we do have some element of trust about it. And actually, we're quite respected in terms of what we do to try and respect the rights of those who produce works. And actually, we get quite a good deal out of that. Certainly, in comparison to other countries, the CLA license is still pretty good, even though the price is going up. So we get that. The ERA license is something that, again, that's the broadcasters are happy to live with, and does us quite well. So confidence with those producing materials is pretty good. But we want to be confident ourselves in what we produce. All right, any other issues? No. Okay, yeah.
Just a quick question. So when you were talking to the JNet guys in Europe, so they were just aggregating a whole bunch of resources, but there was no license attached to these?
Yeah, no, they weren't. Yeah, no. They would all come with varied licenses. That's depending on this. No, they weren't imposing a license on the institutions. What they were saying, you've got this huge file, this video file, that's going to be served from the University of Athens to UCL. And then it's going to be used by another dozen universities. To have this being transferred individually each time from the University of Athens isn't really good for Athens' bandwidth and its connection. So if we can actually have it effectively cached in the way, though this was more than a cache, this was a preemptive storage system. And have it there, so the person in whatever university searches on the media server, which is created in the hub of networks, then this will spread the load and allow faster access. So that's what they were trying to do. They hadn't really thought of anything to do with intellectual property rights.
As an upshot of it, so what tools did they devise?
I have no idea. They stopped inviting me. That's a general troublemaker. I'm not sure. This was early days in them looking at this system, so I don't know whether they've decided. It could be that with technology moving on, they've gone for traditional caching rather than creating active media servers. I must get back in touch and find out what they did. But we can see that, again, with Flickr having added its licenses in the search for under license, and Google having moved that way as well. Now you can do that search. I think that sort of the momentum's there for everyone to understand that when people search for things, they want to know about stuff they can use.
I was telling some of the ladies at lunch, I think it's the expert tool.
Yes, Nottingham Expert too. Yeah.
So this is a search engine which will pull in OER content. And when you make when you mesh and make some new content, you can actually, it's got this OER attribution tool that just actually puts the license on for you. So if you have any issues around how we do this, it might be a good place to start. What's it called?
Expert.
Expert. XPERT, so without the E.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So if you go to Open Nottingham and they've got a few tools there, they're a really good group of developers who like to get feedback as well from users.
There's also the Creative Commons search as well, which. Sorry?
There's one in Google.
Yes, if you go to advanced search in Google, then you can set the licensing. Yeah.
I bet I can find out. Yeah, it's in there.
Okay, well, I'm going to fly through the next bit quite quickly because there's coffee at 3 o'clock. I've got the coffee. Oh, okay. You'll hold on at 3 o'clock. I'll fill up with lukewarm tea and coffee as we go. But getting to know Creative Commons, I suspect that you all know a bit about Creative Commons at least, and probably a fair bit. So I'll not dwell on this, but ask questions as we go.
Do we?
Oh,
That's
no.
what I'm here for.
All right, okay then. All right, okay. That's okay. Certainly. Oh, no. That's well. First of all, it's hopefully quite simple. That's demystifying Creative Commons.
Do we get to take away copies of your slides?
They'll be on SlideShare once I've uploaded them, which unfortunately I couldn't get access except through my mobile phone this morning. So I haven't been able to upload them yet. So, but they will be as soon as I get bandwidth.
Do a search for your name.
Best one is to search for JISC Legal and SlideShare. That's and you can see them there. Or ask me. That's fine. Right, Creative Commons licenses are just a license like any other license. There's absolutely nothing special about them in legal terms. I do remember being at a workshop a few years ago, and I was quite amused when a guy told me, he says, "Oh, it's great, we've now got Creative Commons, we can share our stuff." I'm saying, well, I think actually I've stopped you sharing your stuff beforehand. What do you mean you've got Creative Commons? I had this vision of them having sent money off to someone to get Creative Commons license or something like that. So, but no, it's just a license like any other. And again, going back to the example I gave about just legal, there might be good reasons not to adopt Creative Commons licenses in any number of situations. But there are some things which are obviously attractive about Creative Commons, which is why we're here today. Standard terms, first of all, they are, and again goes with the next one, familiarity. The big advantage of Creative Commons is that people know about them. That's the main benefit they have. They're not particularly wonderful in terms of licenses. There have been better written ones. There have been shorter ones than Creative Commons, but we generally know what they do. Sometimes they don't do exactly what we want them to do, but we live with that because the benefit of familiarity is higher. And again, even though the just legal one, the license that we had was much shorter than Creative Commons originally, then it required someone to read a non-standard license and take it in and work out the consequences. And in the end, we decided that actually that was trumped by people saying, Creative Commons. Excellent, we'll just use that. Hopefully, taking cognizance of the restrictions that are still on Creative Commons. There's a legal status debate. Sometimes you hear about people saying, has it ever been tested if Creative Commons licenses are valid? That's a load of nonsense. Any license is valid. That's a license states the permissions that are required of someone that you give to someone else. There is no question about the validity of them whatsoever. As long as it's the copyright owner or someone that has the permission of the copyright owner that grants the license, then that's fine. It's a valid license. So you can raise your eyebrows when anyone talks about but has it been tested in court? It doesn't need tested in court. It's a license. Right. Other licenses are available. Sometimes it's not the most appropriate license. Again, we've come across examples of, for example, open educational resources which have been software. And the Creative Commons licenses don't apply to software particularly brilliantly. There are perhaps better ones which outside the software world aren't known as well, which is the downside, but actually do deal with the complexities of the particular nuances of software. So various general public licenses and that sort of thing are available for software. The Open Government License, which applies to government. You won't be applying an Open Government License, probably not, but it's another one. It looks pretty much like a Creative Commons license, admittedly, and indeed is compatible with the Creative Commons Attribution License. So, yeah. But that's the Creative Commons licenses aren't special. They're just another set. A point that's made before, they are irrevocable and perpetual. If you Creative Commons license something for a second, then you've done it forever. If nobody knows about it, well, then yes, that's you can begin to get into philosophy pretty quickly, and that's there. But in technical terms, if ever a Creative Commons license has been applied, then that's available forever. So nobody can take that away. It's perpetual as well, so that's you can't have a Creative Commons license with time limits on it. There's three parts there to it. Summary are also known as the legal deed, would give its title. That's the bit you've probably seen, and the bit you will tend to link to. If you're wanting to apply a Creative Commons license to a material, then what you're going to do is say copyright whoever you are. And again, the only reason there, the copyright symbol, by the way, has pretty much no legal significance whatsoever. It just lets people know that it's a copyright work, reminds them of that. The copyright symbol isn't important. Again, occasional fallacy is some say, it doesn't have the copyright symbol on it, so I can copy it as much as I like. No. Then the idea of putting the copyright owner afterwards is to give people a fighting chance of finding the copyright owner in future if they need to track them down. So at least it's a starting place. Admittedly, just legal stuff is put down as copyright and just legal, but just legal isn't actually a legal entity. The stuff that I create in part just legal is in fact owned by the University of Strathclyde. That's my employer. That's there, but we don't put copyright University of Strathclyde. So again, in terms of legal significance, the actual who's down after the copyright symbol makes no difference. Often you then get the year, and again, someone asked it at lunchtime. That has no significance either. That's or little. Again, it's useful to know when something was published, but in copyright terms, it's to do with the death of the author, and that's our authors. It's not to do with the year of publication. There are some copyright periods which do depend on publication, but generally textual documents, it's irrelevant. So yeah, that's there, and then you will put then whatever CC license, and then this is licensed under, and that will be Creative Commons, and then attribution, non-commercial, share alike, a version number 3.0 perhaps, and then the jurisdictional version. You're basically describing the license, the Creative Commons license that you're using. And the thing to do is to you link from that the description of the license to the legal deed, as it's called, what happens with the license. That, in a sense, is how you do it. Now, you've got the symbols available. There are license symbols, which are readily identifiable by users. So those are a good thing to include as well on that. And again, the Creative Commons website, creativecommons.org, contains a tool for you to choose your license, and it will give you the text to stick onto your document, or stick onto your video, or to read out as part of your audio, or to include in the packaging of the audio, whatever's most appropriate. It doesn't say how that license should be applied. It doesn't give you font size. It doesn't give you anything else. You're giving a permission if you choose to make it font size 2, so it's absolutely illegible by anyone. Then it just means nobody's going to see it. So what use is that? So, but if you grant a license, you grant a license. So that's yeah. There are 7 different versions of the Creative Commons licenses. And they all have different elements or components to them that are built up. And again, I'll go through those in a second. The main distinction between each Creative Commons license there is what elements are included. So you have CC 0, which has very few restrictions on it, to CC by NC, ND, no non-commercial, no derivatives, must be attributed for further use, which is the most restrictive of the Creative Commons license, and then a range of things in between. Porting and versions. That's Creative Commons recognised early on that in order to fit best into each jurisdiction, it would be nice to have a particular local version of the Creative Commons license. So you have got, at the moment, we have got a Creative Commons license for England and Wales, and we've got a Creative Commons license for Scotland, and a Creative Commons license for Venezuela and Uruguay and anywhere else you like, many jurisdictions around the world. They do pretty much the same thing, no matter where you are. Doesn't matter. That's on the whole, it does the same thing. There are slight nuances as to how they fit in with copyright exceptions within each country, and to do with third-party rights and other niceties like that. More importantly, for most of the world, it's in the language, the local language. So actually the difference for the French is actually more significant because their Creative Commons license is in French. So that's the porting thing. You have an unported or international version of the license as well. That is the vanilla one, if you like. And it's not ported to any jurisdiction. You're free to use that. So, say I put a Creative Commons license, say the Scottish Creative Commons license onto material. Here's a few fallacies. First of all, some people believe you can't use it outside Scotland. That's nonsense. It applies the world over still. I've just chosen to give the permissions in the Scottish context, but the permissions apply to everyone still. That's there. So the fact that Scotland's applied to it is pretty much irrelevant. In fact, there is very little consequence as to which country's version that you use. More importantly is the version. They've been working their way through evolutions of the Creative Commons license. Currently, England and Wales is on 2.0, version 2.0. Scotland is on 2.5. We're ahead. However, we're both a bit lagging behind because version 3.0 has in fact got a number of tweaks to it, which in fact improve it a fair bit. And again, they're marginal improvements still. But for example, at Just Legal, we had the choice. Do we use the Scottish Creative Commons license because we're based there, the England and Wales one because actually most of our users are based in England and Wales, or do we use the international one? Now, our first consideration was we would like to use the best version. So 3.0 is the one we wanted to use. That's the most modern one in terms of its evolution. So that left us only with the choice of the international unported, and that's what we've gone for. They're working on at the moment, and have been for some time working on, the UK 3.0 one. They're going to recombine England, Wales, Scotland, and they're going to add Northern Ireland, which is currently not covered, into a joint. They've decided the differences aren't enough to justify having two. So in time to come, there'll be UK 3.0. And we'll adopt that one when it comes along as Just Legal's license. Our secondary consideration would have been if our materials were designed for a particular audience. If we were doing an open educational resource on Scottish ethnography, then most of our users are going to be within Scotland, probably. So we might have considered using the Scottish license for that reason. But unless there's a particular locus for jurisdiction, then that's very much a secondary consideration. Yes?
If I license something on CCL 2.0 and I relicense it at CCL 3.0 at some later point, which one does it follow?
Both. Again, they're irrevocable, so if at any point you've licensed under one, that license is still available. So if a user chooses to use under the terms of the 2.5 license, they can do, or they could use under the 3.0. As long as there's one license that allows them to do what they want to do, that's enough. The fact that there's other licenses around is irrelevant. So future licenses don't replace earlier licenses.
So people wouldn't upgrade their license once it's already been licensed?
They don't have to, but what you're doing is relicensing it. So if you have it currently released under 2.5, you might want to also give people the choice of using the most modern license, the 3.0. And so relicensing it under that will allow them that choice rather than being struck. There are a few practical consequences when you're asking for permission from third parties or from staff or getting consent forms signed. Don't specify which Creative Commons version. Because if you get permission today for 2.0 and then you want to use 3.0 next time and you've only got permission for 2.0, then you either take a risk management fudge or you do it right and you just ask for the permission for Creative Commons attribution license. Don't even bother putting the jurisdiction either, and you keep it open. Generally, people aren't going to say, well, I'm only going to give my permission if it's whatever jurisdiction or version. So that's not normally a sticking point. Yes?
You said that Just Legal will go to UK from international, but why?
Because we are a UK-funded service. All our users within the UK, we're only funded to support the UK. So, therefore, that's our audience. So, it's a marginal choice, and it will not make an awful lot of consequence between using the unported 3.0 and using the UK 3.0. But given our audience is very much focused in the UK, then there's a very, very marginal benefit in using the one which is most appropriate to our jurisdiction. If we were speaking a different language in the UK, that would become a much bigger issue. If there were significant differences in terms of the way in which the Creative Commons meshes with copyright exceptions in the UK, then it would be a bigger issue. It's not a big issue. But given that we are UK focused, then it would make sense to use the UK license. But that is trumped by using the most modern version. So that's why we're on what's known as the unported or international version at the moment. And it will stop no one using it. And that's from around the world, the stuff. Yep. When is a CC license not a CC license? This is not a punchline heading up for this one. It's what you can't do is actually add further conditions to Creative Commons licenses and still call it a Creative Commons license. In Creative Commons licenses, again, that term is reserved for those conditions that are contained in the official Creative Commons licenses. You can't say, here's a Creative Commons license, but it's only applicable if you're an educational establishment. That's no longer a Creative Commons license. The official Creative Commons license does not contain that restriction. So, for example, Jorum, if you've been using that repository, it has had to create a new license, a Jorum Educational license, which is not a Creative Commons license. It's got many elements in common, but it's restricted to use by educational establishments. So, the Creative Commons has to be reserved for those ones. JISC tried it as well. I think JISC's PR and comms department decided it would start adding things onto the copyright statement that JISC uses. Admittedly, I don't think they contacted the people who were dealing with the policy side of copyright, and so they had a position where JISC was using a Creative Commons license but attempting to add other parts onto it. Again, there is a danger here. Interestingly, JISC, for example, I'll use that as a good example being part of it, is licensed out its materials under Creative Commons license, and the materials included the JISC logo. Now, if you look at JISC PR and comms, they set down rules as to how the JISC logo is supposed to be used, not mucking around with it, basically, and a certain space round about it, and the sort of thing that marketing people are precious about. And then it's given out under a Creative Commons license, which allows derivatives to be made. You therefore have any right to use the logo and muck around with it, irrevocable rights. So that's slightly unfortunate. You'll see on the Just Legal one, the version of our one, that's that we accept the use of logos, the logos that are contained within it from our Creative Commons grant. We grant another license that whenever you're using the Just Legal materials, you may include our logo as is within the materials, so there's no problem with it. But what you can't do is take our logo and then muck around with it and then use it on other materials and things like that, because we wouldn't want to be misrepresented. There is other law, trademark law and passing off and stuff that would protect that. But again, not all of your work needs to be Creative Commons licensed. It is possible to partition it. You may have a situation whereby you have a particular license for a third-party material, for third-party work that's contained within it. And you may have to say, all of this is Creative Commons apart from the photograph on page 2, which is being used by permission of Jason Miles Campbell and is subject to the following terms and conditions. So that's another possibility. It gets a little bit messy. That's when you have different bits of a document subject to different licenses, but not an easy way around that. Unless, of course, Jason Miles Campbell, the photographer, chooses to allow you to apply a Creative Commons license to my photograph as well, in which case you can roll it up into one license. Okay, there are these 7 licenses. Creative Commons 0 is the one whereby you waive all rights. That's public domain is a bit of a US-centric term, but fair enough. That's I can live with public domain as a term. CC0 means giving up all the rights. CC BY is the attribution license. That's you must attribute. And the way it's phrased, you must attribute according to the way in which the person granting the license says they want to be attributed. Unfortunately, most people don't actually state how they want to be attributed. Just Legal does. Glad to say that we actually do what we preach. So we tell you what we want you to put down there. We'd like you to put the work's been produced by Just Legal and provide a link where possible to Just Legal from that, and is available under a whatever Creative Commons license. In fact, we have chosen CC BY as our license. CC BY SA is the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license, and that means that any derivative works must be relicensed under the same license as the original. So if someone makes a derivative of a CC BY SA work, they must also license it under CC BY SA. And on and so forth. The reason that's used is to ensure that any other derivatives are under the same license. Just Legal, we rejected the use of that, even though it sounds nice. It sounds nice to perpetuate Creative Commons and derivatives. But if you want to take some of the Just Legal material and incorporate onto your website, then that means that your website's going to have to become CC by SA as well, which that gets messy if that's not the one that you've adopted. So we decided to go for CC by, not CC by SA in this thing. One question that comes up is if it's licensed under international 3.0 version of CC by SA, can I do under CC by SA from France version 2.5? Yes, is the answer. All the versions are tend to be equivalent. So you can change jurisdiction and you can change version, but it must be the same type under share alike. CC by ND, no derivatives. You cannot make any changes or adaptations to it without further permission of the copyright owner. Many feel that this isn't really open educational resources because there's reuse but not adaptation or personalization for the particular context. Can't build on it. And then you have the further 3 versions of those same licenses, but including the NC, non-commercial restriction. So it can be used only for non-commercial activity. That's your choice of 7 Creative Commons licenses that exist. I'm going to go through the elements in a bit more detail. Okay, so we've got these 4 elements to deal with: by, the attribution element; NC, the non-commercial qualification; ND, the non-derivative qualification; and SA, the share alike qualification. Share alikes like that because that's how they do it on the Creative Commons license, capital S, capital A, and no space. That doesn't appeal to me as a language purist, but I'll have to live with it, I suppose. I'm the sort of type who puts an apostrophe before bus. That's on phone. It's possibly a little over the top, but by the art of attribution then, again the question was asked earlier on, what's needed? Who needs to be attributed? Well, first and foremost, if the licensor states who's to be attributed, then you have to attribute in that form. If they say that they want attributed in font size 1,000, that's stuff like this, then to comply with the license, then you must do that. That's going to make it kind of unworkable, but that's their choice. That's so there's no test of reasonableness. It's whatever they say. I've come across ones, especially corporate ones, where there's obviously been a committee involved, 3 different departments. They've all wanted their bit. The external, the relations have wanted their bit. The copyright officers wanted their bit, and the academics wanted their bit. And so you end up with a substantial block of stuff, which if you want to attach that to a small photograph, that becomes pretty untidy. So yeah. As long as there is a certain link, as long as someone reasonably looking at the image can link the attribution to the image, then yes, that's fine. So you don't need to put like the 1,000 words of text that they want you to put over your 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre image. That's you can include it somewhere else, as long as it's if someone's coming to that page, they're going to know that there's an attribution attached to it. So yes, and that can be done by hyperlinking somewhere else where the full text of the attribution is included, as long as it's going to be clear to a person that they're getting notice of the attribution. And what form they have to be attributed, whatever stated. Otherwise, if they don't say, then it's going to be in some sort of reasonable format that the person knows who is licensing the material. Now, this is the copyright owner being attributed. You may also have to acknowledge and state who the author is as well, if they've exercised their moral rights. So there's 2 things to be aware of. Under the moral rights, a person who's created a copyright work has got the right to be identified as the author or creator, if they have asserted that right. And the best thing to do is to assume that people have asserted that right. Give people their credit. And indeed, if you might have done enough OER work already to know that one of the big drivers, and there's been a fair bit of research on this, for OER is recognition. And so attribution actually comes quite high in the rewards list. Generally, people aren't looking for anything much more complex than that in terms of reward. A promotion would be good, pay rise would be great, but recognition's often there. So attribution's pretty important. What if it's not practical to attribute? Well, you have to live with whatever they're stating in the way of the licensor is stated is to be the way forward in attribution. So you live with that. However, as was brought up, you can use hyperlinking. You could maybe use a page of attributions in some sort of link. Again, you might have to be creative sometimes as to work out how you apply an attribution to a particular copyright work. But you have to do that. Of course, the other thing you can do is get back in touch with the copyright owner and say, this isn't working for me. How did you see this working? Something like that. But the other way around as well, if you're involved in the creation of open educational resources, make sure you give the user certainty by stating how you want to be attributed. Because otherwise you leave the person guessing, and that's not best. It can be good fun. We spent a good afternoon at Just Legal working out exactly what we wanted our attribution to be. Trying to get it in the smallest number of characters, because we know that short is better for users, but including all the things we want to do. And of course, whenever you get lawyers involved, everyone wants to add their own clause. So we had this danger of it getting longer and longer. So, for example, we wanted to specify that where it puts justlegal.ac.uk, that would be a link. But of course, it can't always be a link, so it has to be a link where practicable or possible. And then we had a debate over practicable or possible. That's and so on and so forth. That's, But a good thing to do and get it right first time, and then it's out of the way. I mentioned before the problem of attribution stacking. What happens when you have derivatives of derivatives of derivatives building on other people's work is that all the attributions still need to be to be respected, and that can be an issue. You can then end up with an unwieldy pile of attributions. There's not much that's going to get you around that other than going back to people and saying, your piece isn't, it's now not much of the final work, can we take yours out? See how you get on with that one. So, okay, NC, non-commercial. What does non-commercial mean? The question was asked for before. Again, the first thing you know is it's the activity, not the organisation you're looking at. I'm afraid there's not a flow chart that's been made that says this falls on one side and this falls on the other side. If you're talking about a profit motive, then that's going to be commercial. If you're talking about charitable, altruistic stuff not involving payment, then it'd be hard to see how that would fall under commercial. And then you have a huge grey area in the middle. Generally, it's been accepted so far that operating education on cost recovery basis has been taken to be non-commercial, though that's not been tested. One of the complicating factors is that the term non-commercial here is contained in a license, and a license is an agreement between a licensor and licensees. The interpretation of it is according to the context and according to the meaning that the parties give it. Now, the truth is the parties don't meet and decide, unfortunately. So we just have to work out in vague terms what this means. What would the parties have agreed to be commercial, non-commercial, had they sat down in the pub and drank a bottle of wine and sorted it out? Hopefully not getting in a fight as a result. What you can do to make life easier when you're creating open educational resources is when you're specifying the license, you can also say, here's the things that we consider to be commercial and here are things we consider not to be commercial. That gives certainty to the users. It comes up quite a lot actually with our work with further education, whereby a lot of outreach activity, evening class activity, things like that, is on a border. And again, it's up to the licensor is free to define how they decide they are determining commercial in that. Again, it's a very good thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially with business and community engagement in higher education now. That's spin-off companies, that's collaborations with commercial bodies. I'm afraid lots of different possibilities and quite tricky to form the categories. So what happens then for commercial breach if you've got an NC license and someone uses your stuff for commercial gain? What can you do? Well, it's just a case of bringing action for infringement of copyright. They don't have a license to do what they're doing. It's the same as any other instance where a person is infringing copyright. Indeed, if they're doing it commercially for gain, then it could be a criminal offence as well. That's interesting. So the other thing to recognise about non-commercial is that this is about control, not prohibition. Again, the glib statement sometimes is non-commercial means that it can't be used for commercial purposes. That's wrong. Non-commercial means you're going to have to get more permission, further permissions, if you want to use it for commercial purposes. So as I mentioned before, a common situation that's occurring is when someone gives a non-commercial license under Creative Commons and then says, if you're interested in commercial use, get in touch with Jason Miles Campbell with your checkbook and we'll see what we can do. And that's a model, I dare say, that will go on.
Where do they put this information on?
Part of the license statement. Well, it's a good practice as part of the license statement to give someone to contact about this.
And maybe a web page or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Or just even an email address, or people will work out how to get in touch if they're given some sort of lead.
Like you were saying, you can't add extra bits on, so call it Creative Commons. But then
Yeah. You're not adding any more conditions onto the Creative Commons license.
saying, but
Yep.
you are saying, when you're saying, I think this is commercial and this isn't, but you just have to say it the right way. Is that the
Well, what you're not doing is changing the fact that it's a non-commercial license and adding any other restrictions. What you're doing is clarifying the use of the term within the license, which you're allowed to do. That's fine. Yes.
If an academic organisation contracts out teaching or developing resources to an independent consultant, which is something that comes my way a lot because I am such a consultant, the fact that the consultant is being paid fees rather than salary, does that make it a commercial use?
Good question, and again, difficult to say. That's.
I assume that it's okay because it's the university that will be using it simply to teach.
If you're looking at the overall activity, then the activity that the materials are being used for is teaching. How the university configures the supply of the teaching really is not part of the activity itself. So whether it pays a salary or whether it pays a fee to a consultant, that doesn't affect the nature of the activity. If, for example, in that situation, the teaching was being delivered to core undergraduate students by way of the normal public grant, as it currently is, then that is likely to be non-commercial. Whereas if it's being delivered, that teaching is being delivered to students paying 10,000, 10,000 is not a lot, that's £30,000 a year, or something clearly with a profit motive attached to it, then that would be commercial activity. Where in between the dividing line falls? £9,000 a year? Does that sound like a dividing line? Who knows?
One of my colleagues who came on this school fellowship thing said this same discussion had come up, and whoever was leading it was saying it could be considered that if you had the £9,000 private one, it's actually the money is still going back to the university, and therefore it could be argued that it's non-commercial.
Oh, absolutely. That's that's certainly if it's again cost recovery, then we're talking about there. If it's cost recovery, then I think there's a good chance of that being held to be non-commercial. But it's a good chance. There's no certainty involved because nobody has decided this yet. And what happens when a very clever university manages to deliver a £9,000 fee a year course for £5,000 cost? Is that then a commercial activity? Good luck to anyone who manages it. But then if you are then a provider down the road who is you're the BPP university, which is a commercial outfit, not getting a grant to do it and charging £9,000 if it ever gets round to that, then you might have a problem with the university up the road, the traditional university, if you like, that is benefiting from use under non-commercial. That's where the arguments could occur. But
it's a very fuzzy area, but
it's hugely fuzzy.
Where people are going to need clarity more and more. Isn't it?
Yeah, in fact,
teaching is divided between hefty funded and non-hefty, externally funded profit making within the same institution.
Yep.
And the materials that I'm trying to work towards are those going to be externally funded courses.
Yep.
So I'm probably going to come away from this still not knowing whether I can use OER materials.
Yep. Yeah, well, there's nothing I can do, and there's nothing anyone can do to change that other than primary legislation or a good old court case if someone fancies being the guinea pig. I tell you, one of the jobs I would love, at the University of Stanford, I think it is, there's a professorship in law set up about 9, 10 years ago, and there was a huge endowment given there, and it's set up this professorship, and the job is to create test cases in court to cause the things, not settle, but actually take the thing to court to get an answer. I'd love that job. Anyone got a large amount of money to give into it? A professional professor of troublemaking. Well, that's fantastic. Or getting an answer, which I think is there. I could give you my thank you. I could give you my views about how it would change the legal system so that we'd have more certainty, because it's not very useful. But there's nothing that's going to help us particularly in this. And as you say, the lines are going to get forever more blurred with the coming changes. I think that when you're talking about traditional teaching under what was hefty funds, cost recovery, undergraduate, straightforward, then I think if you gave me 5 pints, I would say I would be taking the risk decision to stick my neck out at that being non-commercial. Though where the line is tough to see.
Sorry, can I, just in answer to your question, you might not be able to use the non-commercial side for the teaching, but you would be able to use a different Creative Commons that didn't state that non-commercial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could use all just Legal's materials that are available under the CC BY license. We decided not to adopt that for this sort of reason. So there. The consequence is, of course, that you can go away. You can. Not all of our materials are CC BY, by the way. Sometimes we've had to accept limitations from those who've been writing materials for us. But the materials that are, it means you could go away. You could compile them into a book and sell the book. Yeah, good luck. You're going to have to attribute us, and you're going to have to include the fact that they're available under a CC BY license from Just Legal, which means that people who might buy your book might actually just go and get them for free off Just Legal. But if you can get the value from it, good for you. ND, non-derivative license. What is a derivative? A derivative is anything which changes the material. So that can be actually altering it, cutting, pasting bits out, changing bits, adding, subtracting bits, translating it into a different language, translating it into a different medium. Any of those things are derivative work. If it has got the ND part to the Creative Commons license, you cannot make a derivative of it. That can be a bit of a pain. That means you can copy it as is, but that's it. As I've said, that's considered not really an open educational resource. Again, some of the consequences are that, like, for example, law materials, it means that nobody would be able to update them, which is kind of important with legal materials generally. So it does place a significant restriction on them. Again, we're working against culture changes here, and I understand that some people have this thing that they are proud of what they've produced and they don't want it mucked around with. And that's why ND tends to come in. The licenses also provide for collections. A collection is where a number of Creative Commons licensed works are put together into a meta work, if you like, a bigger work, but without changing any of the included bits. It's an anthology, if you like. You can then relicense the collection out under another Creative Commons license. The individual parts of it will remain licensed under the original licenses, and you must choose a license to relicense under that's compatible with the licenses of the materials contained within. This is layers of copyright. This gets complicated. So if you have materials A, B, and C with 3 different Creative Commons licenses, you can then relicense the collection by putting the 3 of them together and relicense under one Creative Commons license that's compatible with the 3 sub-licenses, if you like. There's a tool that I'll give you a link to later on that allows you to work out if you're using this license, this license, this license for the material, what options you've got for relicensing the collection. That's, which is useful to save you head scratching. We've done the head scratching, lots of it, to come up with this tool. So a collection is where you have non-derivative works collected together.
That could be like iTunes U, then, couldn't it?
Yes, yeah. Again, it's control, not prohibition. It's always a good idea if you're going to use ND to say, if you want to make an adaptation, please contact whatever, and let people know that what you're doing is controlling. Okay, admittedly, if you're going to say no to every request, then no point. But hopefully there are going to be situations where you will allow it. Oops, and share alike. Oops, that slide has disappeared with the same text from the last one. Never mind. Share alike means the obligation to relicense under the same license as the original. It allows for a derivative to be made, but the relicensing must happen under the same license. So it's a way of controlling what further licenses are available. If you don't have SA, it means that a derivative can be licensed under any other license, whatever you like. So that could be a commercial license. So, as I say, with just legal stuff, you can remix our stuff and make derivatives as you like and then sell them under any license you like. Not Creative Commons, any license. If you can get away with it. Well, if you can get someone to buy it, that's more to the point. When it's available for free elsewhere. You'll still need to attribute in terms of that, but other than that, that's as far as it goes. I will point out that you cannot have a license with both ND and SA, because ND is non-derivative and share alike presupposes a derivative. So that's why you don't get any with ND and SA together. Right, interoperability and blending. What happens when you put open educational resources, Creative Commons licensed material together? There are two tools that were created by Web2 Rights and ourselves working together, and Creative Commons UK, in fact. And this wizard is available at web2rights.com/Creative Commons. There's two wizards. One is, given the materials, and again, this was the situation I was saying there, given that you've got several materials and you're bringing them in under different Creative Commons licenses, so you've got a bit that's CC0, a bit that's CC BY, a bit that's CC BY NC, you'll tick the boxes to see which ones you're using as the input material, and it will tell you what possible licenses you can use for the blended version. Okay, and the second wizard is, say you've chosen which CC license you want to use. Say a funding body has said you must use CC BY, for example. Then you can enter in the wizard that you're going to use a CC BY, and it will tell you what materials you can put into that material, that work. So you'll be able to put CC0 and CC BY materials into that. You won't be able to put CC BY NC materials into something that you're going to relicense under CC BY. There was a lot of thinking behind the logic and the expert system behind this wizard to get it right, and a lot of work to explain exactly what it does, because it's quite complicated between the two. But wizard 1 means if you're starting with the materials, working out what you can relicense, the new derivative work, combining a number of materials as. And wizard 2 is, given that you know what you want to output, which CC license, what you can include as materials within that. The Open Government License, the OGL, is applying to a greater number of government productions, things funded by government, reports and data sets and all sorts, although there's also a data set license as well. The Open Government License, the OGL, when you see that, it is compatible with CC BY. So you can treat it as being a CC BY license for the purpose of incorporating materials into a derivative work. That's quite useful. In future, hopefully we'll see more interoperable licenses. There isn't any operability otherwise at the moment. So, for example, the software open licenses aren't compatible with Creative Commons. You can certainly produce an open educational resource that says pages 1 to 4 of guidance are hereby licensed under Creative Commons BY, and page 5 of code is produced under the GPL license. That's fine, but you can't just mix them together and use one license. Right, some scenarios for discussion. Right, this is you doing some group work. Questions to say this is a good choice by Alpha Hill University. Right, would you?
No, we're not going to justify it on this vote.
Okay.
I'm voting anonymously.
We thought if they wanted to make a taster course, then this is a good license for it.
Okay, why?
Well, I thought we weren't quite simple from this, but we thought probably what they were trying to do is attract more students to the university. So probably just give them a taste of what the course might look like, and that's the reasoning for the license.
Okay.
But that's the reasoning.
Yeah.
We made that up.
Yeah, I was similar. I was assuming that they were just starting out and they had to change culture in their own university, and that this was a risk-averse, safe path to take in their first venture into OER. But this is an assumption.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
This is a question on which the discussions about ND depend. If you change the look and feel of a resource without changing the content, so if you change its font and its colour scheme and its font size, is that making a derivative?
Yes.
Yes. So you can't update your materials.
No.
So you'd have to know that you don't want to use these in 5 years.
It's equivalent to CLA license. CLA license allows you to photocopy the material, but you're not allowed to move things around and change the font and all the rest of it. That's so that's something we've been used to, in fairness. But yeah, that's anything is whether if you chose to increase the font size by 1 point, then anyone's ever going to come back and complain about it. Well, that's a risk management decision you take. But technically, anything you do to it that changes it from its original might be will be in fact an adaptation and a derivative. There are perhaps consequences. If you increase the font size by 1 point, you might put things out of alignment. Say there's a poem on page 4 that was laid out in a particular manner. That's so I could see some repercussions and control that might want to be had over it. But yeah, that's is there a point down here?
It's gone.
The tension for us was between ND and SA, none of the others. The others
Right.
seemed fine. It was the ND SA, and there was this tension between quality control and association with either bad or enhanced quality in the future,
Right.
and that issue, and whether the attribution to the originating organisation would ever be appropriately identified practically in a user environment. Not whether it's formally there, but whether anybody ever noticed that it was originated by either a lesser or a better quality organisation in the first place. That seemed to be, for me, the biggest tension about ND versus SA.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone reckon it was a bad choice? Going for something else? Okay. That's
Yeah, I just wouldn't recommend it because you were not able to update your own materials. And I think the premise here is a lot of fear about people distorting what you've done. But then if they do distort, that becomes a fair use issue.
Why would you go to update your own materials?
Why don't you update your own materials?
Because that's a derivative.
So
but if you were the copyright owner, you can still update your materials. It's only those that are licensed.
But you won't change the
Okay,
license.
so in
You
an
can't change
institution-
the license after that.
You wouldn't be. There would always be a CC by NC and D license granted over it.
So you could
Can't you change the ND to SA? I mean,
after that.
You can do afterwards,
Later
yes.
on, yeah.
Well, then both would exist now. They both don't really make sense. You can choose one or the other. So you choose the SA one
SA would.
because that's obviously more beneficial. But technically speaking, it's irrevocable. So there's still the ND version floating around in ether
yes,
somewhere.
you can't go backwards, but you could go forward.
That's right. That's yeah.
Either
If you try to go
more,
backwards, then someone will just rely on the earlier one that's more liberal.
Yes, yes.
Is there any evidence to suggest that SA versus ND licenses travel further or not further in terms of penetration? So one argument here, which I think is a very good argument, if you release stuff under ND and nobody can do anything with it, well, there's SA stuff out there that you can, so I'd chase the SA and use that instead.
It very much depends on context. That's and there's not, as far as I know, any overall study as to how they're used overall. That's but it does vary hugely. Again, being in early days, then it depends on personalities and connections and networks more than anything else. But I think for me the question is it worth bothering with a Creative Commons license at all?
Yeah.
Don't you just put your stuff up on your website and don't bother granting a license, just people can access it. That's because all you're allowed people to do is to take the stuff and then email it on to their friends. That's can't just send the link anyway. That's so that allows you control over it. it seems that by adopting such a cautious approach, then I'm asking myself what the benefit is of Creative Commons license at all. Now, it could be that it demonstrates some buy-in to the idea of open educational resource, even though it's only a small step. And so it might be worthwhile for that reason. It could be that it's the first step. Once they've seen that, then allowing some of these restrictions to drop off probably isn't going to result in the world coming to a standstill either. But and accepting that loss of control, people could take the photograph of the principal and draw funny specks on it and devil horns. Been able to do that for a long time. Put it on the dartboard and throw darts. That's and again, the risk is obviously if you take off ND that people can play about with your stuff. And but please note that the license means that it does state that if a derivative work is made, it must be clearly marked what has changed and who has changed it. You cannot just take just those materials and take the word not out wherever it appears and just reprint it. That's for example.
I guess we were more concerned in a derivative work. You were concerned that the branding of it would be lost.
Yep.
And what you say, Beataville University, who did a bad job of doing derivative, would have their branding on it. And
Yeah, absolutely. But remember, you've got the control of the attribution.
But how clear is the attribution? And as you say, which... So
That's
you're
up to you as licensor.
Yeah.
So you can tackle it that way. But yes, it could get muddied, and yes, if keeping the brand identity as it is crucial, and it could be here because it is about raising the profile of the institution, then that might tip you towards the non-derivative.
Do you not also have to worry about the fact that Google, if Beataville has a higher Google ranking than you, then their stuff's going to be, their derivative form's going to be found ahead of yours, unless you can control how you're appearing in Google.
No.
You can make that a condition of the license, though, can't you?
Well, you can't decide.
So you
can put the attribution such that, or play around your attribution to try and assure the best ranking in Google, for example.
So what's the etiquette then in the open world?
What do you mean?
So like the world of open educational resources as a sort of movement that I understand it is. Do they have an etiquette which is just CC0 and everybody can share?
No, that's no. Again, different people have different ideas to what counts as an open educational resource. On the whole, the ability to reuse and repurpose to be an educational resource, because really here we're talking about a marketing resource. And that's which is different from an educational resource in this scenario. This looks like more like a marketing resource that they're doing. That's being used by some institutions. That's
so reuse and repurpose would need the derivative, which means you leave ND off.
Yeah, that's right.
What I don't like is that they're the things you can't do. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't design it. Do you know what I mean? Sort of irritating.
Yeah.
So you leave that off, and you put on S.
Possibly, I'll leave off SC as you like.
Or even leave off SC if you so that you get, okay, I just need to know. What's the etiquette?
I know everybody wants to have a critique.
Reuse.
So you go to a website, you can't find a license. Isn't the default copyright?
Yes, the default is that there is you can't do anything with it. Of course, you can still send someone a link to that as long as it's an openly available one, and there isn't a provision against linking to it.
This kind of reminds me of learning resources that you saw before the Creative Commons movement.
Yes.
Like some of the mass materials that were definitely developed for learning and teaching, but it was pre-Creative Commons. So I think now if they've developed them, they would use this.
A great example is another project I'm working on. There's a whole bunch, 19 guides to do with improving dispute resolution in higher education, and these guides are phenomenal. They were written about 5-6 years ago, and the project came to an end, and they were required by the funding to make them available in perpetuity to the higher education world. They disappeared off the host university's website, and they're available on the Wayback Machine, that's a web archive, so I got them back again. And then we were going to bring them up to date because they're fantastic materials and continue access. However, the lawyers who were involved, the solicitors firm, are trying to stop us doing that because they say that anything we do to them is going to reflect on them. They don't want them brought back online because they're currently out of date and they have no control over us updating them. Doesn't sound available to well, they're not available to the HE community in perpetuity. So, but what they effectively want to do is try and impose this sort of thing on them, which means that they become useless as time goes on, or at least less use, which is, again, a freezing effect and not really the idea of an open educational resource. That was never intended to be an open educational resource, well, at least back then nobody was thinking about that. But
what if I don't know, make a resource and decide, I want it to be share alike and then CC by, but then my university's only really allowing me to put it on the VLE.
Well,
are the two compatible, or have I got to remove that license?
I can put a CC license on something and then delete it. That's now, theoretically, there's a license on that the material, but if there's no copy of it anyone can have, then nobody's going to be able to use it. Likewise, if I lock it somewhere,
but it's not illegal to do that.
No, there's nothing that requires you in the Creative Commons licenses to make your materials available in any way. You are barred from using DRM on it. You cannot use the DRM or technical protection measures, things that stop people using your materials. So you can add sort of licensing technology to sound files to stop people playing the sound file unless they get a code from you. You're not allowed to do that under the Creative Commons license. That's explicitly in the license. But it doesn't say you have to make it available on an open website. It doesn't say you have to make it available to anyone who asks. You make it available as you choose. And that's down to the copyright owner, the license one. I've got one more quick scenario, but to give the tea and coffee, soup and refreshment at the back, what I'm going to do is just get, without discussion, just get you to give me some thoughts as to what the Bucksfizz College decides it wishes to develop and promote a community of business tutors, collaboratively creating materials across the FE sector. It chooses a CC by NCSA license. Is that a good choice or not? All right, let's hear a few views then on this one here. You've just been appointed as head of the Business Tutor Collaborative Materials Project. Your predecessor has decided on CC by NCSA as a license to be adopted. Is that a good choice?
So which one does it contain? Which means you then have
Sorry.
You would have preferred what you said. You would have preferred the license.
Can we get some feedback?
I think it's the right choice because it gives attribution, it allows the different tutors to take them away, amend them, change them, use them. And by having SA, it means that none of them could go and set up their own private college and steal students away from those colleges.
I'm dubious about non-commercial for business teaching because I'd have thought that one of the colleges might be asked to go into company and teach their management trainees, and that I would I would regard that as I would think that would be very likely to fall on the commercial side of the dividing line.
I think that actually that brings out two points. The first of those is that everyone jumps to non-commercial, and then you ask the question: what commercial opportunity are you losing by not giving it outlets? What are you going to do in terms of commercialisation? And Jen answers, well, we're not sure, but in future we might do something commercial like this. And then there's the question of, well, why don't you just make it commercially available and see what happens? And take the NC thing out and take that plunge, because actually there's quite a lot of evidence that for most activity, most OER activity, the benefits to be gained by producing OER even without the NC part. So for commercial use as well, it raises the profile of the person producing it, the profile of the institution. It means that we have a greater body of resources to use generally within further higher education. And as I say, if someone manages to take it, go out and use it for commercial gain and and do well out of this? Well, first of all, chances are it's going to have actually good things. If the private college is set up, then the chances of them might want to get the original author of the materials in to do something in terms of this. So generally the spin-offs tend to be better than the lost commercial gain. There are other situations whereby that you put down the NC qualification because you want to sell books of the materials, and that is a lucrative enterprise, and then that can be the case. So you have to be careful in watching out what NC and commercially allowed one. The second one is the point I think we're raising there is interference with various activities which could be commercial in nature. So therefore, and as you say, business tutors may be doing stuff which may be commercial. So you're introducing, by using the NC, some uncertainty at least, where people are going to have to go back and say, well, is this non-commercial or commercial? On the other hand, of course, the copyright owner is always free to grant a commercial license as well. That might be for nothing. They might say in each instance, well, you want to set up your college, that's fine, you can use the materials for nothing, I'll give you a license just for that. Not a CC license, I'm just giving you permission to use them for nothing there. And that's in addition to the NC license, that's a Creative Commons license. So you can have more than one license covering different things. Any other views then? What about the SA element? That's any views on that?
Sorry, which element?
Sorry?
You said any more views on which element?
The SA, the share-alike element.
The only view I had on the SA element was that we have a long list of attributes, the attribution at some point in time.
You're always going to have that, though, if it's developed, and that's people are going to be adding each time that it's to the materials. So if it's a ladder of development, then you have that problem. No matter which of the licenses, unless it's a CC0 license, any attribution license will suffer from that. If I was a business tutor myself within this, the downside of the NC license is that then changing it, I'm stuck with this license, and we've spoken about, in this instance, there are factors that maybe do push towards the buy NCSA license, but that might not be the same for everyone when there's a load of people involved. And so by introducing the SA license, that puts some sort of barrier in the way of certain other uses for other people, which might be more appropriate under a different license. So that's the downside to it. It doesn't ensure that any derivative is going to be made available through a Creative Commons license back again. So it allows further derivatives of derivatives to be made. So it allows for updating in the future. So that's the advantage of the SA license. Yeah, of course, if you don't have the SA element, you can produce a derivative that nobody can adapt further in future depending on what license you put on it. So that's the choice between them.
You can imagine there's a lot of university administrators and accountants looking at the NC.
Yeah.
To particularly understand that in the States, NC is being dropped quite a lot now. We're having to look at dropping it, and I'm going to have a discussion with people that will just say, show me the evidence. I know it's very context dependent, but I'm just wondering whether JISC has got any good case studies or good aggregations of data around the kind of change that comes about if you drop your NC. Do you have that kind of stuff? Because we are.
I'm not sure. It's not something that from the legal side we've been looking at,
right.
But certainly
somebody might.
David Kernahan or Amber Thomas. I don't know if you've had contact with either of those two. They are the program managers for the overall OER project and do an awful lot of work on the benefits of OER. I would say they're quite evangelistic for OER rather than neutral, but they are the ones who will have access to that sort of that study if it's been done.
Great.
I can give contact details if you want to. Okay, any further comments on this one? Okay, we'll be doing more scenarios afterwards. Fresh tea and coffee and other bits and pieces have arrived, so it's time for some fresh air, stretch the legs, post lunch, stomach exercise.